Mm. Hello again, family and community members. We are glad to have you back, and we are happy to welcome Alia Pineda Medina, and she can correct me if I misspelled that. Many apologies if I did or mispronounced that. She's going to be sharing with us about supporting multi-exceptional learners, building knowledge for effective advocacy. Alia, go ahead and take it away for us. Oh, I'm sorry, her bio. Alia Pineda Medina is a PhD candidate graduate teaching assistant at the Department of Educational Studies and Gifted Education Resource Institute at Purdue University. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Erica. Can everybody hear me well?
We can hear you, and I can see your slides in the slideshow.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a fantastic first session with Dr. Rim. Like Dr. Rim, we will be discussing a special population of gifted learners, multi-exceptionals. So with that, we welcome you to our session. I'm Alia Pineda Medina, and I'm joined by my colleague, Katie Hansen. And before we get started, we will briefly introduce ourselves. So as Erica said, I'm Alia Pineda. I'm a PhD candidate at the Gifted Education Research and Resource Institute, known as GERI, at Purdue University in Indiana. Uh, Prior to coming to Indiana, I got my teaching license in elementary education from the City College of New York. And at Purdue University, I serve as an undergraduate. I serve undergraduate pre-service teachers, teaching about gifted education, and I have served as a youth program coordinator. Katie, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. As Alia said, I'm Katie Hansen. I'm also a graduate student at Purdue, pursuing my master's degree in curriculum and instruction with a concentration in gifted education. I've also taught second grade and kindergarten at the National Cathedral School and have undergraduate degrees in early childhood education and human and organizational development from Vanderbilt University.
Okay, so before we dive in, we're going to do a little pre-assessment. So in the chat, please respond to the question, what's the first word you think of when you think about multi-exceptional learners? We'll take about 2 to 3 minutes. Also, we want to preface that if you have any questions during our presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat or wait till the end or email us. We include our contact information at the end. Oh, Jen, complex. Gunnarsson, challenging. Sarah, unique. Jennifer, multi-layered. Ooh, I like that, multi-layered. Neurodiversity, Craig, definitely hitting it on the nail on the head there. Ooh. Think about someone who is highly gifted but also may have other complexities and like neurodiversity. Interesting. Yeah, and with a lot of these, this is with defining multi-exceptional learners, there's just not one way to define them because we're looking at an exceptionality uh coming from the giftedness and also from having uh some kind of learning disability or physical disability. So you have those kind of two identities that are interacting with one another. Oh, and Jennifer said asynchronous. Yes, and that definitely comes from that gifted identity. And today, Katie will talk about like the different definitions that come with multi-exceptionality, because multi-exceptionality is more of a newer term that is being used today, but most people commonly use the term twice exceptionality. All right, Katie. You want to go
Thanks,
into?
Alia.
Nope.
You may have heard of twice exceptionality, which is used to describe an individual who experiences an exceptional ability in one area along with a disability in another. But many times, a student's exceptionalities are multifaceted. That is, they're gifted in one or more areas, and they also have one or more disabilities or other exceptionalities. For these students, we believe the term multi-exceptional is appropriate. Multi-exceptionality can take on many forms. Exceptionalities include all types of neurodiversity, which was mentioned in the chat, behavioral concerns, and psychological conditions. For example, a multi-exceptional child may be gifted, have ADHD, and severe anxiety. Other related terms that you might encounter is thrice exceptional, which is used to describe individuals who are gifted, have one or more disabilities, and come from a culturally diverse and or socially marginalized background.
Yeah, and originally before the established definition of twice exceptional, there were concerns over its variability because students can be gifted in multiple areas, and they can have a disability that can manifest under different categories. Thus, multi-exceptionality kind of addresses these issues. And a definition that isn't included here that I recently read in an article is M4. So it builds on thrice exceptional, talking about individuals who are culturally diverse, but also linguistically diverse, who are gifted and also have a disability. So that is known as M4.
Ooh, thanks for that new definition, Alia. There are some widely assumed myths about gifted students that often lead to many multi-exceptional students being underidentified for gifted services. First, a child with a disability can't be gifted. When educators and parents believe this, they don't even think to consider these students for gifted programming. Two, a child receiving low grades or test scores can't be gifted. If disabilities are hindering a student's grade or test scores, they may still be gifted but may not initially qualify for gifted programming if their corporation uses a testing tool or grades to identify gifted students. Three, gifted students are always well behaved. Although this is often the assumption, it's not always the case. Behavior issues in gifted students could be a result of Dabrowski's overexcitabilities, which we'll talk more about later. They could also be a result of an exceptionality, or they could simply be a result of being bored in class. Gifted students don't need extra support, which also goes with number 5. They'll be fine because they're so smart. Actually, the opposite can be true. Gifted students have unique social and emotional needs. Just as athletes need coaches to be their best selves, gifted children need effective teachers to develop their full potential.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. And definitely with those last three myths, those myths come from the assumption that these students, even though that they are so young, that because they are gifted, they will know how to act like adults. And that's that adultification of gifted students that we see. That because they're so smart, they should know how to act in a classroom. They should know how to act outside. They should know how to function by themselves and know how to monitor themselves. And they should know all the skills needed to be successful in a classroom. But that is not just not true. Although these students develop asynchronously, they still have the body of a child, and you might have a kindergartner who may think like a second grader, but still has the struggles of a kindergartner, like how to be able to develop fine motor skills. So they might have some misbehavior because they're frustrated that their mind can understand a task, but their body is just not cooperating with them. And to contextualize these myths, we have a short clip from Miss Chang Gifted, a veteran gifted teacher from Georgia.
Good morning, Miss Chang. I am sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you a question about Kevin? Oh, hey, Miss White. Yeah, sure. What's up? Why in the world is he in your gifted class? He does not seem gifted to me. Are you kidding? He's like the exact definition of giftedness. I can barely read his writing. He's constantly disrupting class, and sometimes he doesn't even seem motivated to do the work. Yeah, he has ADHD. He's twice exceptional. Look that up. I think you're confusing high achieving with giftedness. Well, aren't gifted kids supposed to be high achieving because they they're so smart. Actually, that's a misconception, and honestly, it's really not fair to place that expectation on kids who identify as gifted. How am I supposed to tell the difference, Miss Chang? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. The important thing is that we don't place certain expectations on kids just because of labels. That does make sense, but I still don't think Kevin's gifted.
Yeah, and this mentality is very common, unfortunately, with some teachers, because learning about giftedness, it's not something that is very common in preparation programs. In my own prep program, I never learned about what giftedness was. Yet when I had my state exam, I was expected to know how to serve these kids. And for multi-exceptional students, it's worse because they're a subpopulation that briefly gets touched upon, but they have very specific nuances and very specific ways of serving them. And now, in the field of gifted education, we are starting to recognize the need to have specific programs. And actually, at I believe Cleveland State, they actually are now starting a master's program on twice exceptionality for teachers. So, yeah.
It's a great point, Alia, and I think because of that, any way that we can raise awareness about multi-exceptionality and get teachers more training on how to recognize and teach these students is really important. We'd like to talk now a little bit about the masking effect. When a child's disability or disabilities are seen first, a child's giftedness may not be seen at all. These students may only receive special education students with no special services for giftedness. This may result in them being consistently under-challenged, which can result in boredom, acting out, or both. When a student's giftedness is seen but not their disability, they may receive gifted education services. They may also be perceived, especially during gifted programming, as underachievers. We often see this assumption take the form of, I know they can do it, but they aren't, so they must be lazy. Well, maybe there's something else going on here. These students may also perform okay in the earlier grades, but struggle in later grades as the curriculum becomes more challenging and organization of mind and body become more important. The third, and often the trickiest possibility, is when a student's disability is masking their giftedness and their giftedness is masking their disability, resulting in them being not identified at all. These students are viewed as average performers. Their giftedness allows them to cope enough in the classroom to get by, but their disability is hindering them from developing their true potential. So essentially, they fly under the radar. These students also may perform decently in earlier grades, but start to struggle as the curriculum becomes more difficult. Now, optimally, and by raising awareness of the other three, we want every student to be in the smiley face section here, where both their giftedness and their disabilities are recognized, so they can get the support and challenge that they need.
Yep, and that's that sweet spot. But unfortunately, with the first one that Katie talked about, the disability going unnoticed and the giftedness getting recognized, over time the student learns to overcompensate for their disability. So again, that masking, you never notice that that student has a disability, but when they encounter challenges that are related to their disability, that's when that starts to appear, and that's when we could possibly see some underachievement. And with a student's disability and giftedness not being noticed, now that's just, it's canceling out and they just appear as an average performer. And those students are the ones who get lost in the mix, unfortunately. Okay, and because we mentioned underachievement, we feel it's very important to talk about this since there is a relation between multi-exceptionality and underachievement. So underachievement is defined as the discrepancy between expected achievement and actual achievement. And with this definition, it specifically outlined that it cannot be the result of having a learning disability. However, recent research by Dr. Ophelia Desmond has demonstrated the interaction between disability and giftedness. It's not causal, but contributory. So with this definition, they basically said underachievement cannot be caused by having a learning disability. But with research, we've determined that it's not a causal fact. It's not causal. It's actually contributory. because with underachievement, there are a milieu of factors that can lead one to underachieve, and there's not one specific factor that leads to underachievement. So it just adds to the list of factors that to look for. And in her study, in Dr. Desmond's study, she found that students with learning uh, disabilities who had adverse experience related to their learning disabilities gave away to lower self-efficacy, and that's confidence in their abilities and motivation. And conversely, students with ADHD had increased environmental risk factors like distractibility or social challenges. These last findings are similar to McCoach's, though she also found lower self-regulatory skills, which can manifest as difficulties making plans, trouble focusing, and adjusting to changes.
Yeah, thanks, Alia. Because these multi-exceptional students are often overlooked and or underperform, this results in a lot of missed potential. A 2019 study found that multi-exceptional students were disproportionately underrepresented in gifted education. And a 2013 study estimated that there are approximately 360,000 multi-exceptional students in the United States. And this number is much likely to this number is more likely to be higher now, since the study was done in 2013. We can help these students be more often identified and help them realize their full potential in a few ways. First, by raising awareness, both among educators and parents, by sharing what you've learned here today and with people who may not know. Second, comprehensive evaluations are often helpful. This is when educational diagnosticians use individualized comprehensive evaluations that assess both strengths and weaknesses across different measures with a focus on the student's strengths. Third, the use of universal screening tools when assessing giftedness. This means that all students are screened for gifted programming, not just students who are chosen by teachers. This could include a multitude of identification tools, such as a universal screening assessment like a cognitive ability test, teacher recommendations, student portfolios, and evidence from parents. A good universal screening program might look at all of these criteria and then use or versus and rules when evaluating the criteria. So they might say a student needs to have a certain score on the COGAT, or a teacher recommendation, or a student portfolio that showcases evidence of giftedness. These or criteria instead of and helps reduce testing bias and other challenges that may hinder multi-exceptional students from being identified.
I'm glad you add that, Katie, about the at the end using the or rule, because we've found in research you could get more from or. This is actually research that has come from Betsy McCoach, who's tested out these different rules and found that with the and rule, you actually exclude more students because you ask for students to have this specific COGAT score and this type of teacher recommendation and these type of test scores in classrooms. So when you have and rules, you're making your gifted programs more exclusive because you're asking for more criteria that all students need to score on. With or, you allow students to have one or the other, and it allows for you to have a larger pool of applicants. And I also wanted to add that it's not only telling teachers and parents, it's also administrators and even counselors. A lot of counselors in their programs, they don't learn what giftedness is at all. And when uh, parents bring their children to see counselors, they actually might misdiagnose them with something else, believing that maybe a student who is displaying an psychomotor overexcitability actually has ADHD. If they don't know anything about giftedness, well, they're gonna think it's ADHD, but in actuality, it's something actually different that's very common for gifted students. So it's very important to inform all stakeholders about what you hear about here today. Okay, so we just threw a lot of information at you. So let's take a moment to digest and put what you learned to the test. We talked earlier about the masking effect that can occur with multi-exceptional students. So based on the scenario, what's getting noticed and what's getting missed? So Aiden is a bright 10-year-old who loves science and often impresses teachers with his deep knowledge during class discussions. He speaks confidently and tests well, but his written work is often rushed, messy, and far below what he expresses verbally. Teachers describe him as smart, but say he needs to try harder. At home, Aiden avoids writing and gets frustrated with homework, recently saying school feels too hard. So, again, based on the scenario, what's getting noticed and what's getting missed. We'll take 2 to 3 minutes here, and you can drop your answers in the chat. Okay, I see Jen put it in the chat. Could be possible dyslexia. Jennifer said giftedness is getting noticed. Disability is not. Yeah, that's definitely the case of what we're seeing here. And as Katie discussed earlier, they might confuse the lower performance with underachievement here. Aiden likes to learn but struggles with different ways to observe and process information. Perhaps he likes listening to the teacher but not writing things down. Yeah, and that can be just a difference in possible learning style. Maybe he's able to process the information verbally, but having to write it down is more difficult. And it could be because possible dyslexia, that the student just struggles to uh, communicate what he wants to say in writing, but he is better able to vocalize what he's thinking. So you might need some accommodations there in class or on exams. Okay. If there's nothing else in the chat, we'll move on to the next slide. I also want to add that if, for example, this was a female, it might be the scenario might play out a little differently because there are those gender differences in how females are meant to write versus males. So they might have, if Aiden was a female, criticized her a bit more because of the handwriting. Um, but definitely the giftedness adds that certain level of those, unspoken expectations that, oh, this child is gifted. They should be able to know how to write in a way that I'm able to read perfectly and not write as a second grader, even though the student might be a second grader. Okay. Now we transition to talking about the characteristics of multi-exceptional learners. This is not an exhaustive list, nor does every multi-exceptional child manifest them in the same way. So how it looks varies from student to student. This is the same thing with gifted characteristics as well. So first, they can have feelings of inferiority, and that can come from constantly being their disability being talked about, and this could be at home, this can be at school, this could be among peers. So they develop an inferiority complex and like start to feel like they can't do certain things because of their disability, and that can lead to just a general lack of self-confidence, and this can affect the type of work they put out, the type of work that they approach. They might not take on a certain challenge because I can't do that because I have this disability that's holding me back. So they might have that failure to complete tasks because in their mind, they don't think they're capable of doing it. And to want to take on challenges. They won't want to because that lack of motivation internally, but also externally when you're constantly, hearing things about your disability. So they're constantly thinking from a deficit perspective and hearing about themselves in a deficit perspective. Frustration at knowing the answer, but unable to effectively communicate the knowledge, just like with that scenario that we had with Aiden. Aiden knows what he wants to say, but he cannot write it down in the same way that he verbalizes it. And in some classrooms, those accommodations might not be in place, or a teacher has this very specific style of doing things that for a student to do something in a non-traditional way, they just see it as them not being able to achieve like other students. So they might see them as an underachiever, even though it's just an issue of accommodation. They may have these intense emotions. Um, for example, I had a student, twice exceptional. She, when we would talk about the end of the school year, we had to be very careful because she would think of, when we would say the end of the school year, she would think of the end, like the end of life. And she would have a very strong reaction. And she's in the class with other students who aren't twice exceptional, and they wouldn't understand why she's having those feelings or how she even thinks in that way. And even the intense emotions can also range to how they're being talked about from an adult perspective. If they constantly are hearing sources of praise, then they might put a lot on themselves to make sure that they meet those expectations. Um, and then they might have poor social skills, often seen as antisocial behaviors. And this is intensified for gifted students because there's that asynchronous development happening. You can be in fifth grade and have the mind of a seventh grader. Now, because you're thinking like a seventh grader, it's kind of hard to relate to your peers, um, because they might see you in a different, as someone who's different from them. And that could be because you're uh, quote unquote smarter than them, or they see you as a nerd, um, even though you might have the same interests as your peers. Nope. See a question in the chat. Oh, yes. And Jennifer highlighted it's not just learning disabilities, it can be autism, oppositional defiance disorder, bipolar. The giftedness can amplify those challenges. Yes, definitely. And lastly, like highly distractible. A student that has ADHD might find it really hard to focus on a single task, especially they are thinking about all these other things that are happening. There are other things that are happening in the classroom that make it harder for them to focus on the task that's at hand. So they might fail to complete some tasks.
When we're considering the characteristics of multi-exceptional students, we also want to keep in mind Dabrowski's overexcitabilities. As Jennifer said, it's not just learning disabilities. There's all kinds of things going on. Um, and these overexcitabilities are common in many gifted students. They're traits that the social scientist Dabrowski observed in many of the gifted students he worked with. Now, not all gifted students may exhibit all of these traits, but I often see a lot of nodding and smiling when I present this slide because many parents can see their child when I describe at least one of these traits. I think they're important to keep in mind because parents sometimes see these traits and think, is my child multi-exceptional? Maybe, also maybe not. It could instead be an overexcitability. So first, psychomotor, lots of physical energy. These are kids who are so excited about telling you about something. They're walking around in circles and waving their hands. It's an abundance of physical energy, more than their chronological aged peers. Sensual, heightened awareness of one or more of the five senses. This is often seen in gifted artists, composers, and chefs. Intellectual overexcitabilities. These students always want to know more. They're never satisfied with, I don't know. These students are often reflective and are sometimes morally and ethically sensitive. They may have trouble sleeping at night, for example, because they're worrying about some faraway problem that they saw in the news. The hungry children they saw displaced after a hurricane. How can we help them? Things like that. Imaginational. These children might have vivid dreams or very strong imaginations, always in another world and constantly making up stories. And finally, emotional overexcitability. These children have strong emotional reactions. Everything may be going on fine 1 minute, and then all of a sudden the child's very upset or frustrated. Like the example that Alia was giving earlier. And you think, what just happened here? What's going on? So students with emotional overexcitability often take on the feelings of others, like in the hurricane example, or they're so sad, maybe crying about when they saw Sally's brother get hurt on the playground today. The experiences of others, they take on those emotions oftentimes. And in the next slide, you'll see some videos that I think effectively portray how some of the characteristics we've been mentioning could play out in the classroom.
Yeah. Before we go to those videos, I think definitely for emotional overexcitability, just the reaction that some of these students have can be very, very strong, even can come off as explosive, like to someone who, can't understand why they're coming from this. For example, gifted students can be very competitive, and when they lose, how they react can go one way. They can react in one way, in a way that is considered quote unquote normal, that it is, they're like, oh man, maybe I'll do better next time. But for some students, I have seen them start to cry, others scream, others throw things, because they don't know how to handle losing. And that's something else that comes with being gifted, that those tendencies for perfectionism. So their reactions to their perfectionism can be very strong. And now we'll go into some more videos from another look at some videos from Miss Chang Gifted that provide some context as to how the characteristics we discussed can look inside of the classroom.
Okay, class, y'all have about 30 minutes left in the day to take this test. Do y'all have any questions? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good luck. 30 minutes to take a test. That's a lot of time. That's 3 sets of 10 minutes, 6 sets of 5 minutes, or 30 sets of 1 minute. Okay, that's plenty of time. If my pencil is yellow and bananas are yellow, does that mean my pencil is a fruit? And if it is a fruit, can I take a bite? No, I do not take a bite of your pencil at school. Miss Chang says be yourself, but when I'm myself, everybody just says I'm weird. Do not bite the pencil. I repeat, do not be the weird kid and bite the pencil. I'd rather be home in bed right now, reading Dog Man again. Oh, the librarian said I can't check out Dog Man. She says I'm too smart for cartoon books. Why does she care what I read? I love Dog Man. Maybe Miss Chang will let me borrow her copy of Dog Man, and then I can just go home and read it in bed. Bed. The word bed actually looks like a bed. Okay, maybe I could just doodle a bed right here. God, I'm bored. Maybe I can ask and go get some water. That won't work. I have a water bottle. Miss Chang's going to be like, you have a water bottle. Take a sip there. I know. I could go to the bathroom. No, that's not going to work. The bathrooms just smell weird and the toilets flush way too loud. Maybe I can just say I'm going to the bathroom, walk down the hall and back. No, Miss White will see me in the hall and she'll ask me why I'm wandering around the school. Maybe I should start the test.
Yeah, with that student, we're seeing that distractibility that we talked about, already thinking about a bunch of different things, having a lot of questions too. But also we see that concern for how they're perceived by peers, not wanting to be perceived as weird for taking a bite out of a pencil.
Okay, class, it's time to go to recess. We're going to pause this math activity, so just go ahead and line up, and then we'll finish this when we get back inside. Did Miss Chang just say recess? But I'm not done with these math problems. How can I just stop mid-math problems and go to recess like it's no big deal? I mean, recess would be more fun if I weren't thinking about my unfinished math problems slowly crumbling without me. If I don't finish this now, I'll forget the exact 47-step plan my brain just whispered to me to solve these math problems without using any scratch paper. But then when I don't use scratch paper, Miss Chang's like, did you show your work? Did you show your work? Maybe Miss Chang won't notice me and I can just disappear into the void forever, like socks in the dryer. I know, I'll just pretend to tie my shoe for a few minutes. Did she just say hurry up? Why would I be in a hurry? I don't even like recess. Other kids are always excited for recess. I'm over here dying a slow death. Fine, I'll line up and go outside, but I'm going to dramatically sigh the entire way there to let Miss Chang know that I am not happy about having to stop my math and go outside for recess.
Yeah, and with this student, we kind of see that jump from thinking of like the pressure of, oh gosh, I gotta finish this test, and thinking about what their teacher will think about them if they don't complete the test. So they kind of jump from it's the way that they think about these events manifests in a more negative, kind of blown out of proportional way. Like they think it's the end of the world if they're unable to finish this test to the best of their abilities. So the way that they think about their performance is kind of um, amplified from other students, and their reactions to their self-evaluations are a lot more negative and critical.
Thanks, Alia. As we've seen in the video, multi-exceptional students face unique challenges both inside and outside the classroom. They may exhibit stress and frustration that impact self-esteem. If I'm smart, why can't I do this? For example, a child who has advanced comprehension but struggles to read basic text. That can be pretty frustrating, as you might imagine. Identity development. Am I a smart kid? Or the kid with autism? Or am I the kid with anxiety? Can I be all of these? Taking this a step further, thrice exceptional students may be managing three or more identities, which can really be confusing for children and adults too, for that matter. Difficulties interacting with peers. These students are often navigating multiple classroom settings, and maybe they don't feel like they really fit into any of them. We can help these students by finding groups of other students who share the same interests, highlighting their strengths, and finding activities and other children that play to these strengths. They also might have an intense need to understand their diagnosis or diagnoses. They're gifted and they want all the details, and they're usually able to comprehend it, at least on some level. With this, they might feel a huge relief after being diagnosed. Oh, this is why I have trouble reading words, but I understand hard books. Having some kind of an explanation as to what they've been feeling is often a big relief for them. And finally, they may need guidance from adults in managing their life after their diagnoses. Now what? How do I operate in a world where I have ADHD and I'm gifted and I have severe anxiety? What does that mean for me going forward? This is where trusted adults can help provide a lot of guidance.
And that last step is that last challenge is so crucial, Katie, because again, this adultification of gifted students that they find out that they have these diagnoses and are also gifted in one or more areas, and it's kind of like, you know, the idea that, oh, these students that because they're gifted, they should be able to know what to do with themselves. Not exactly. They have one or more identities that they need to grapple with and understand. So they need to have someone to, kind of show them the different pathways that they can navigate over time. And with identity development, being thrice exceptional, being gifted and culturally and linguistically diverse can actually complicate matters. For example, there is the acting white phenomenon that occurs with Black students, that some students, they will intentionally underachieve because they don't want to be perceived by their peers as acting white. So they do that in order to fit in better with their peers. So in this case, they could not acknowledge their gifted identity, focus on their cultural identity, but at the same time, they might also not acknowledge their having a learning disability or a physical disability or another kind of disability. because they want to ensure that they're fitting in with their culturally culturally same peers. Okay, now we talk a bit about advocating for your multi-exceptional learner. And the most important thing that you can do is focusing on their whole identity and not just disability. A lot of times that's the first thing that gets focused on because it's like, okay, this child has this disability. What can we do to fix it? It's a problem of seeing them as something that's fixable, always focusing on parts that need to be fixed, those weaknesses, but never celebrating those strengths or seeing them as something different. And when you're constantly focusing on their disability, um, that's how they seem to identify themselves. Like they just see themselves as someone as having a disability, not someone who can be gifted, not as somebody who comes from this cultural background. So it's very important to move from a deficit perspective to an assets-based one. Um, because when you constantly talk about someone's disability and their weaknesses that come from it that need to be fixed, you're feeding into that sense of inadequacy. And they're not going to be feel that they're capable to take on challenges. They're not going to feel confident in their abilities, their self-efficacy. They're going to have lowered self-efficacy. They're not going to have that motivation to want to challenge themselves or try something new, and they might find ways to cope, negative coping mechanisms that allow them to still feel uh, that they're within their comfort zone. So they might never try something and intentionally do a different task so that they stay within their comfort zone so that they can say, oh, well, I didn't try that because, I don't think I'm capable of doing this. I know I'm capable of doing this, so I'm only going to stick with this. And that can lead to underachievement over time because they're not trying something that they are capable of. It's just that they've been told countless times uh, that the one identity is something that needs to be more focused on. So that's why we need to identify their strengths. So shifting those conversations from weaknesses to strengths, seeing like uh, as a parent and teacher, well, as a teacher, you're only able to see those strengths in a classroom setting. As parents, you're only able to see that in a home setting. But even so, you still noting those things down can be very, very important because what can be seen at home might not be seen in school and vice versa. And that's how you're able to start those conversations of collaboration, going to your child's teacher or going to the student's parent and telling them what you're noticing and seeing how you're able to build on those strengths in those different environments instead of constantly working on those weaknesses. And that's how you're able to have those more productive conversations that allow you over time to start to work on the students' motivation, allow them to give them opportunities to challenge themselves because then you're providing more appropriate support based on the strengths that you're seeing. And also some assistive technologies that could help as well, that you might already be using. And this comes from the NAGC's Teaching for High Potential, screen reading software, such as Chromebox, VoiceOver, and Narrator. Chromebox works with Chrome, VoiceOver works with, I believe, Mac, and PC, Narrator works for PC. And also to enhance executive functioning skills, Trello. Personally, I use a planner to keep myself organized. You could also use apps on your phone or but I feel planners work pretty well for myself, just because I intentionally write things down and there's that internal reward when I can highlight something off, knowing that I was able to accomplish that, but also keeping myself accountable, like, oh, I didn't do this task, so I need to do it like today. So those are some uh, technologies that you can use. All right, so at this point, we have reached the end of our presentation, but we want you to have the opportunity to put into practice what you've learned. So reflect on the following scenario and using the guided questions, think about how you would respond in this situation. So your child, who is highly verbal and curious about science, has always struggled with handwriting and becomes overwhelmed in noisy environments. The school recognizes their behavioral challenges, but hasn't assessed for giftedness or any learning differences. You feel your child's potential is being overlooked. Some questions to consider. How might you approach the school to begin a conversation about both possible giftedness and learning differences? What kind of documentation or observations could you bring to advocate for a more holistic evaluation? You can drop your answer in the chat if you'd like.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson and Ms. Pineda Medina. Again, I hope I'm saying that correctly. I would really start, by sitting down with the teachers and talking to them about, what it is that they're specifically seeing, and then sharing with them some resources on multi-exceptionalities, overexcitabilities, some gifted children's learning differences, and then ask, especially, it would depend on how much those differences are exacerbating the student's ability to function within the classroom environment, but potentially even reach out to a special ed director or coordinator to see if there are some behavioral checklists we can look at to begin an evaluation process for potential multi-exceptionalities.
Yeah, that's a very great answer, Erica. And I definitely sharing literature with teachers is very important because not all teachers might have had the training during their
Right.
time in undergraduate or even in their master's program. So they not might not be familiar with what a gifted student is or what multi-exceptionality is, or just have a lot of information on different types of disabilities, how they might manifest. So that is very important sharing that information. And
Mhm.
I'm seeing some responses in the chat from Jen. Maybe highlighting evidence of strong performance in quiet environments or when done verbally instead of written, and asking for a meeting to discuss the discrepancy and how to promote their success in the classroom. I think that's really good, uh, Jen. Just coming in with that evidence to show, like, hey, I've seen this student, be able to work in these environments when having these modifications to show that there's already something that can be done. Because for the schools, it might take some time for them, but if you show them, hey, this is all that needs to be adjusted, that might make things a lot more simpler for them and more receptive to putting in those modifications. Gunnarsson, create your own Google form for the things that are happening frequently with your child to see how frequently and other details about what's happening. Oh, I like that. Showing them that data to show them, um, this is the frequency and these are the associated things that are happening, to highlight that discrepancy between the cognitive ability testing and performance data. Definitely. Definitely coming in with the data and your noticings is super important. That way you can start the conversation on a positive note. Instead of just talking about the negatives, you can talk about what it is that is working instead of what isn't working, because that can steer the conversation in a more positive direction ultimately. Okay, and you can
Awesome.
continue your
Are there
answers.
any other? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to share the resources at the end, and just say if people want to keep putting stuff in the chat.
Does
But
anyone
for
else
res
have questions?
While we're looking for questions, I also wanted to add that one of the websites is the Ohio Department of Education does have a twice exceptional guide. It's slightly more than slightly outdated, but it is a good place to start when you're bringing in resources. Um, the Ohio Department of Education does recognize twice exceptionality and multi-exceptionality. So, knowing where your base is when you start is also, I think, essential when you're bringing in documentation.
It's a great point, Catherine, because if the school district or the teacher is not aware that the department has defined it, then that gives a little bit more foundation to the discussion that the family is going to have with teachers and with administrators. So, well, again, thank you so much, Ms. Hanson and Ms. Pineda Medina, just for your contributions and for your expertise on our neurodivergent students. Families, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will join you again at 3:30 with Josie. I'm sorry, at 3:40 with Josie Bear. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.